Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. Again, my name is Ethan O'Malley. I work at Bluebird Bio, and I'm the head of the technical documentation at Bluebird. And you might ask, what is technical documentation? But for the long and short of it is I do anything to get the BLA submitted and approved, any of the documentation internally, as well as the regulatory documentation. So Module 3, compiling all the Module 3 documentation, working with the CMC teams and the CMOs to get that compiled. Also, after we've submitted the application, then responding to information requests from the agency and getting the sites ready for their inspections. This is a lot of work in normal times. It's a lot of those who've lived through it know it's an extreme amount of work, and it's hard in normal times. But during the past couple of years and with the pandemic, it's been even more challenging. And so I want to pass on some of the learnings and experiences that we've had at Bluebird to help you with your next application and or inspection. So I want to start with a story about being prepared. And I grew up in California, San Francisco to be exact. And I have a love of nature, and so did my father. And he taught me to enjoy camping and backpacking in the Sierra Mountains. And so he taught me really early on to, what to do to be prepared if we ran across a bear, basically. Because we know in California there's a lot of bears, and if you're going to go backpacking in their backyard, inevitably you'll run across one, and so you want to be prepared. So one of the golden rules he taught me was to store your food away from where you're sleeping, so don't store food where you're sleeping. And then also, if you do come across a bear, you have to stay calm and don't do anything drastic, and just pay attention. So fast forward a few years, as I got older, I was a ambitious teenager, and I took a bunch of my friends camping into Yosemite National Park. And Yosemite is known for bears. The first night we're there, I prepared the campsite. I was the most experienced camper. I prepared the campsite and had everything ready. We went to sleep, and then my buddy woke me up at 2:00 in the morning and said, "Ethan, there's a bear in the camp. What do we do?" And I grabbed my flashlight and shined it out, and there was two beady eyes staring back at me, and I could see the bear. And I told everybody, I said, "Don't worry, the bear just wants the food. Let's just let him be, keep an eye on him, and let him be." And sure enough, the bear eventually went away in the night, and we woke up in the morning time and went and inspected what the bear did. And the bear the bear grabbed about half of our food. But again, we were prepared. We had brought extra food, and we hadn't slept near the food, so we were safe and everything was good. So we had a good story to tell, and everything was fine. So that's my story about preparation. Preparation is being prepared for what happens if, and that's why I want to talk to you today about preparing for an inspection. Share some of my experiences with our recent inspections, so that you'll be prepared when the FDA comes calling, and you're ready for it. Oops. Next. So the agenda today, I'm going to go over some background about the inspection background, what our product is, what part of the agency we are working with, particularly with the FDA, the learnings that we gathered from the inspection, both from a pre-inspection perspective, both from the sponsor and the CMO, as well as what we learned at the inspection itself, and then the conclusions and takeaways. All of this happened during a pandemic, so there are some things that I will highlight that I thought were interesting that may be as a result of the pandemic and weren't necessarily of regular times. But I'll give away a little bit of the punchline. And the punchline is be prepared for a lot of granular detail from the FDA. The FDA has asked for a lot of information to be filed in the BLA itself, and then they've been using the information request to actually even ask for more detail, and a lot more detail from the CMOs, more than we've expected in the past. And this may be a combination of two things. It may be a combination of the fact that we're in the gene therapy space and this is new to the FDA. So they're not 100% sure what's important and what's not important. So they're asking for everything. Or it also may be a fact that they've asked for all this information because it was during a pandemic. And they wanted to use essentially the art of the virtual visit and ask for all this information that they normally would get if they had been on site. So they just asked for a lot more granular detail even before they stepped foot on the facility, and that was interesting. That was new to us. And again, it may be because we're in gene therapy, or it may be because a result of COVID or the pandemic itself. So information background: the who, what, and why. So we'll start with the what. So Bluebird is a gene therapy company. We do ex vivo LVV manufacturing, and it starts with the plasmids. We manufacture our plasmids. All of our manufacturing takes place with CMOs. So there's multiple contract manufacturers. The two manufacturers I'm going to focus on today in today's presentation are our LVV manufacturer and then our drug substance, drug product manufacturer. But the process starts with plasmids. We manufacture plasmids, and then we transfect the HEK 293 T cells to produce our lentiviral vector with the plasmids, genetic material of desire. In parallel, or at the time when we need drug product, we actually collect HPCA cells for the patient, and then along with their LVV, we transduce those patient cells and transfer the genetic material into those patient cells, and then formulate it, and then ultimately it's infused back into the patient for the drug. That drug product is infused back into the patient. So we use multiple contract manufacturers along the way, but the ones that I'll be talking today are the LVV manufacturer and then the drug substance, drug product manufacturer. Oh, and then one thing of interest is that the main thing about contract manufacturers is it's good to use contract manufacturers because you don't have to maintain the facility. You don't have to have all that infrastructure and overhead. But the one thing you give up, as most people know, is control and control and access to the facility, etc. And that, interestingly enough, was challenging during COVID, because as we know, with COVID there were restrictions, both restrictions at sites and travel restrictions and etc. And having that lack of control was a little bit more challenging during the pandemic than in other years. So the who, so part of the agency that we work with. So we're working with CBER. We are obviously a gene therapy product, so we're working with the Office of Tissue and Advanced Therapies within CBER. And then the other office that we work with, obviously, is the Compliance and Biologics Office and the DMPQ division, manufacturing and product quality. They're doing the inspections of the sites themselves. So this is the part of the agency that we're working with. And then why? Why are we getting inspected? Well, we're getting inspected because we submitted a BLA. We actually submitted 2 BLAs. We have 2 products. They're both manufactured at both facilities. So both the LVV manufacturer and the drug substance drug product manufacturer manufacture both products for us. And so we submitted a BLA, and so we need to do a pre-licensing inspection. And as this comes out of the verbiage right from the FDA page, but inspection of a new or existing facility to manufacture a new biological product, and that's a PLI. One of my pet peeves is when people mix up PLI and PAI. In this case, we're talking about pre-licensing inspection, which is actually getting the approval of the product. And then we also had another inspection that we dealt with during this time, and that was GMP. So one of the facilities, the drug substance drug product manufacturer, has already been inspected by the FDA, and they were up for their biannual inspection. So that's a GMP inspection. So the two types of inspections that we're talking today are the PLI and the GMP inspection. All right. So the inspection. Oh, by the way, I'll just note that if you hear me clearing my throat a lot, I'm actually just getting over COVID right now. So I might be a little stuffy and sound a little funny. So I apologize for that, but I'm just getting over COVID, and I'm fine, by the way. All right, so the inspection. So what happened? So as I said, we have two of our manufacturers were being inspected. We have the LVV manufacturer and the drug substance drug product manufacturer. Again, both products were manufactured at both sites. They are both U.S.-based sites. These sites had not been commercially approved for, basically for the product that we're doing for gene therapy or any other similar gene therapy. They were the sites that we use for our clinical commercial manufacturing, although the clinical and commercial manufacturing may have not been manufactured in the same building. So it was the same company, it was the same compound or the same facility, but it wasn't necessarily the same building. So we did do clinical and commercial manufacturing there, but they were done in different buildings or different sites within the compound. The LVV manufacturer was not all that experienced, so we had to spend a lot of time with them, getting them ready for the inspection, and then letting them know what to expect and what to expect, basically. So we had to work with them a lot. The other site, the drug substance drug product facility, was had a larger infrastructure behind it. So they had a larger company that had broad manufacturing experience, and they could leverage that. And they did use that to come in. They brought in other people from their organization to help them get ready for the facility, for the audit, for the inspection, and get them ready for audits and things like that. So, all right. So prior to the inspection, what did we do? So, the first thing that we did and the site did was do mock audits. We would go there, the sponsor, Bluebird, would go there, inspect the site, audit the site, come up with findings, relay those findings to the site, and then resolve them. One of the best things that they did was hire outside consultants. So both facilities hired their own outside consultant and had them do basically a mock audit, pretend like they were the FDA, come in and review it. And this was very good, and they learned a lot because the outside consultants really treated themselves like FDA reviewers, and they went down rabbit holes, looked at deviations, really pressed the CMO on why they made certain decisions, why they considered something a minor deviation or a major deviation, etc. And so those were very, very helpful and very good for both for us and for them. And they shared those findings with us, which was very helpful. So we could then prepare, because that was very good for us to prepare of possible areas which were weak or possibly weak before the FDA got in there. The next thing, obviously, that was done is, practice runs. So we did water runs or media runs just to see how the facility operated, etc. And those were useful to a point, but the one that was the most useful is when we actually did a mock product run and what they called a PLI demonstration run. And this, I thought, was extremely helpful for both us and the facility. So one interesting thing about our gene therapy product, it's a low volume product. We're not we're going after very orphan drug applications, rare diseases, etc. So so we don't manufacture a lot of batches at the facility. So the fact that the facility itself doesn't have a lot of manufacturing experience with our product, and with the fact that there there's a lot of new personnel coming on to the facility, whether it's new personnel sitting in because of the pandemic, maybe because they're out sick or they've got a cover, or you have personnel coming in because there's just been a high turnover rate. As we know, during the pandemic, there was a lot of high turnover at facilities, and even at our sponsor, even at Bluebird, there was a lot of turnover. So the fact that you had a lot of new personnel who didn't have a lot of experience running the process, having these mock demonstration runs was really important, and we learned a lot prior to the FDA getting there. So those were very useful and very informative for both the sponsor, for us, and for the CMO. The other thing that we did, prior to the inspection and preparing for it was have meetings. Now, in normal times or non-pandemic times, we would have had much more face-to-face meetings, being on site, get everyone together in a room, get all the key personnel, go through things, go storyboards, deep dives, etc. But this was the pandemic, and we weren't able to do that. So we really had to rely on Teams meetings and Zoom meetings, and that was a new way of working that a lot of our staff had to get used to and get comfortable with, especially the leadership. Leadership at our company in particular had to get used to the fact that they couldn't actually go there and actually speak to somebody directly and look them in the eye and shake their hand and do that bonding. We had to rely on the virtual meetings. So that was challenging, but the way we got around that is we scheduled a lot of meetings. We had a lot of touch points set up between leadership and the working teams and et cetera, to go through things. So that worked really well. But one of the things that we learned, or what I learned during the process, was the contracts that we have set up with the CMOs. Contracts generally are set up, to reflect how many manufacturing runs you're going to do. How many runs am I going to do in 2022? How many am I going to do in 2023? How much of the facility am I going to use? And that's the way your contracts are set up. And then you set up other, money in the contract for like, inspections or regulatory preparation of regulatory documentation, etc. But the contracts, the way they were set up, didn't have enough time, didn't have enough money and resources and personnel resources set aside for all this we were doing. So we had to on the fly sort of renegotiate those contracts and build in more time and build in more availability from the company. And so that's a call out to anybody looking to go in the future of what to do, especially during this virtual setting, is that you may need more support. So anyway, that was just a interesting learning, that surprise that we had. So again, prior to the inspection, so at this point we've filed 2 BLAs with the agency. They've been accepted. And now they're in the review stage. The agency has already contacted us, saying setting up when they're going to come and start inspecting these facilities. They want to know when we're going to be manufacturing, etc. So that's all happening. But as this is all working in the background, we start to receive information requests, and we received a lot. We have 2 products, so I mean, let's be honest. There are 2 products, so you're going to get a lot of questions. And there was some redundancy of the questions between the products. One question could answer another product as well. But there was a lot that weren't. And as you know, people working with the FDA, you get a question, especially CMC questions, And there's multi-part questions. So you get one question, you can say, well, I got one question, but then there's like 10 parts to it. There's an A, B, C, D, E, F, etc. So these questions were quite involved, and 75% of them were CMC questions. So it was there was a lot of information we had to go through. And of those questions, of the 75% that were CMC questions, about 30% of them required CMO support. There was a lot of information that we had to get from the CMO, and we had a quick turnaround. We had to turn these around generally in 1 week time or less. So the learning here is that, or the call out I would say to anybody, is you need to establish a process early with the CMO of who's going to be on this team to respond to the questions, who's the joint rapid team, how are you going to align on sharing the questions, aligning on the response to the questions, and then getting approval for the questions, because you have to have both companies approve the questions. And so that meant that we have to have more meetings, a lot of meetings, a lot of weekly touch points to make sure that we're getting what we need when we need it in a timely manner, and that we can respond to the agency, as appropriately to give them the information that they're requesting. And again, the thing that here was surprising was the amount of, and we'll get into more detail about this, but the amount of CMO information that they were requesting. They were asking a lot more information about the facility than we were expecting. And so that meant we had a lot of engagement with the CMO. So again, meant a lot of meetings, a lot of coordination. This again happened during COVID. Nothing really would have changed during COVID in this situation. Face-to-face meetings wouldn't have necessarily, they could have helped, but considering the time frame of how quickly these things were turning around, I don't think it really made a difference. The only thing that would have made a difference is if we had somebody who was on site at the facility, but that was challenging to get somebody on site at the facility just to help coordinate the responses. But the meetings did work, and everything did, at the end, everything did come out well. So what did the FDA want? What were they asking for? This is like, the details of some of the information requests that they had. So one thing that they asked for was provide copies of the commercial batch records. And what I thought was unusual about this is that it's not surprising that they asked for commercial batch. They asked for them before they showed up at the site. And so this made it a little bit challenging. So it was an information request. They said, give us, copies of your commercial batch records. And this made it a little bit challenging with the CMO and actually any manufacturer, because they don't like to finalize batch records and send them out, or commercial batch records, until they're finalized. And they're actually not finalized until the application is approved. So it's a little bit of a chicken and the eggs sort of scenario, where they don't want it. They're waiting for it to be all done before they finalize them, but then the agency wants them ahead of time. And this also created a little bit of a dilemma with the CMOs, some of the CMOs, or one of the CMOs in particular, because they had an issue with version control. They were using the same product number for the clinical and commercial material, and they didn't want to publish commercial batch records, and then because we were still manufacturing clinical material, and then accidentally, manufacture clinical material with the commercial batch records. So it just presented a little bit of logistical challenges, and it was just surprising to us how early they wanted this. Not that they wanted the commercial batch records, but just how soon they wanted them. The other thing that the agency asked a lot about was our analytical method SOPs and our method transfer reports. Again, this isn't too surprising, but what made it challenging for us, and this is just a call out to anybody who's working in this field, is keep good records of why you changed methods, why you went from one method to another method, what was the rationale, the reasoning, when you transferred from one early clinical site to another clinical site or testing site, how did you validate, or how did not validate, but how did you ensure that the results coming from that one facility were the same at the next facility? And we weren't necessarily all very good at keeping those records early on, so it was challenging. And then the other thing challenging is that you're going back in time and you have a lot of turnover. So with a lot of turnover, a lot of new people, it's hard recreating that institutional knowledge of why we did things. So just to call out to, keep good records. And some companies are better at it than other companies, so just FYI. The next one they asked for a lot about was raw materials, both critical and non-critical raw materials. And this I found was particularly interesting because I think it's really came out of the pandemic. And as you know, with the pandemic, we had two issues that caused us supply chain issues or supply issues. One was we had some materials which were being scarfed up by vaccine manufacturers or by hospitals that were using them because they were coming to the front of the line for COVID activities. So if it was COVID related and related to manufacturing a vaccine or you're supporting patients or things like that, those institutions and companies went to the front of the line to get the supplies, and then it left the rest of us trying to scramble to find material. So that was one. And the other one is that we know during the pandemic, it really just disrupted the supply chain routes, getting material from Asia over to US and et cetera, or, from anywhere, wherever it was coming from. And so the agency is very aware of this. And so they asked very detailed questions about, how are you going to ensure supply? If we approve you, how are you going to make sure that you get, that you can continue manufacturing? So that was just something to be aware of, is that, they're very aware of the supply constraints out there. So if you have issues with, sourcing some materials, have a plan of what you're going to do to respond to the agency if they ask you about that. A couple of the other things they were asking for were C of A's for all raw materials. This wasn't so surprising to me because if you dealt with the EMA asked for a lot of C of A's, so I was used to this. But I do think that this is possibly in response to the supply issues. They want to know where you're sourcing your raw materials from and who your vendors are. So they wanted to see everything. And again, when they were talking about raw materials, they were talking about everything. They were talking about, bags and, bags and bottles and tips and even, as well as reagents and as well as, critical raw materials. So they were talking about everything. The other thing that they asked for, which was, again, surprising, was commercial shipping SOP. The commercial shipping SOP for us it's not necessarily surprising because we're shipping patient cells from one place to the next, and they want to make sure that, from a safety perspective, how are we ensuring that the material is safe, et cetera. So that makes sense. But it just reminds me, and we'll get into a little bit, I'll touch on a little bit later, but just reminds me when they start asking for SOPs, it's like when I first started in regulatory, the agency, when you would do a submission, they would ask for all your SOPs. They would ask for everything. And so this reminded me of this, where they're sort of going backwards and they're saying, hey, give us all your SOPs, give us everything. So just a call out, just interesting. Okay. Oh, additionally, they asked for, again, this is the facility information. Additionally, they asked for a lot of facility information. So they asked about raw material qualification program. They asked about the aseptic process simulation data and results, equipment and cleaning validations, environmental monitoring. Environmental monitoring was big. They asked to know what the excursions were during your APS runs or during your PPQ runs. So anyway, so they asked for a lot of information from the facility. And again, this was all prior to setting foot on the facility. So this was a little bit unusual. And again, it may be a situation where the agency was trying to sort of do a virtual visit and handle it that way, as opposed to doing, getting this information on site at the time when they did the inspection. So the inspection. So it wasn't the day of. There was each of these inspections was basically a 5-day inspection at each facility. Both sites were inspected in 2021. There was a small on-site presence from us because because of COVID restrictions at the facility, we just couldn't have a large contingency of people there. So we did decide to create essentially a war room at a facility that was, or at a hotel that was very close to the manufacturing facility. So we were very close in proximity and time zone to everything that was taking place at the facility. So we did that. This is another interesting thing. The agency agreed that we had 2 products being manufactured at a facility, and generally they would come in and inspect each product separately. But they agreed to inspect each facility one time for both products. So they just wanted to see one of our products being manufactured, and they figured the other product was being manufactured in a similar manner so that it would be representative of it. And then the other thing that they did, so anyway, so they combined the inspections. So rather than having possibly 4 inspections, 2 inspections at each site, we only had 2 inspections. And then the other thing they did at the drug product manufacturer is they combined a GMP inspection and a PLI inspection into one. And so I found this interesting because it's been my experience in the past that the agency has taken as many opportunities as they can to come in and inspect a facility and really get in there, see what's going on, and make sure that they're complying with the CFR. And here we have a situation where they easily agreed to combining inspections on several occasions, and that may be a reflection of the pandemic, and they didn't want to spend too much time at the facility, and they knew it was challenging, or it may be it may have just been coincidence. I don't know which, but it could be a combination of the fact that, or it could be a result of the pandemic itself. And then lastly, the CMO led the inspection. The inspection lasted about 5 days. There were no major observations at either facility, so that was good. An overview of the inspection itself. The inspection itself was heavy GMP focus, very light product questions. So we got maybe like 10% of the questions we had during the inspection were product related, and those were focused around product release. But the majority of everything else was GMP focused questions. So focusing on quality management systems, LIMS, inventory management, traceability. Inventory management, again, I felt that they were really harping on the inventory management system, particularly because they're worried about the supply chain issues. And they really wanted to know how the facilities are making sure that they have product, basically they have all the raw materials and everything they need to manufacture. The other things that they focused on for us were traceability, chain of identity, in particular, and that makes sense again because we're using human cells, we're giving them back to the patients, so they want to make sure, they want to know what the traceability is, the chain of identity, and make sure that everything is being done correctly. The other questions they had were about capacity planning. They wanted to know at the facility itself, how are you going to handle commercial manufacturing? Do you have the capacity for personnel? Do you have the capacity? Do you need another site? You going to open up another, room to manufacture, et cetera? So they asked questions about that. And then another interesting one, which was kind of funny, they asked a lot of questions about container closure integrity testing. And this one caught us off surprise. We're like, why are they asking these questions? And it turned out that one of our bag manufacturers who had a DMF with the FDA had pulled their DMF. So the FDA couldn't get information that they were looking for, so they came to us for the information, and then we said, oh, the DMF's been pulled, and so we actually had to go to the manufacturer, get all the information from them and then give it to the FDA. So it all worked out, but at first it was a little strange, like, why are they asking all these questions? But we didn't know that our bag manufacturer had retracted its DMF. So, all right. So takeaways are lessons learned. So getting to the end here. Lessons learned from the whole endeavor. The FDA is looking for very granular BLAs. They want a lot of information in the BLAs, and if they're not getting in the BLAs, they're actually using the IRs to ask for even additional information. And this is okay, but this is fine. I mean, the FDA obviously can ask whatever it wants, and we need to provide it. But going back to my earlier statement, I like to be prepared. So I like to know what the FDA is going to be asking and what they want from us. And I've always erred on the side of giving the FDA just enough so that they can ask questions, but not so much that you're burdened with information requests. And so one of my fears is if you give FDA everything, they're going to ask all these questions. If you give them too much, they're going to just keep on asking these questions. And it's like if you give a mouse a cookie. You give a mouse a cookie, the mouse is going to say, well, how about some milk? And then you give the mouse some milk, and the mouse is going to say, well, I need a napkin now to wipe the milk off my chin. And they just keep asking these questions. So you don't want to give them too much. You want to have a balance. But it's challenging if you don't know where the bar is. You don't know what the FDA is asking. So need to learn in the future from the agency is where their bar is. What do they really want, rather than continuing to answer all these IRs. But so the agency has provided some new guidance, and I think the last one that came out was March for gene therapies, but we need some more. We need a little bit more granular detail about what they're looking for. So the industry should continue to ask the agency to continue to update its guidances so that we can understand, so we can understand what they're asking for. So, all right. And then takeaways. Takeaways from this experience. PLIs continue to focus heavily on quality and GMP. The PLIs don't focus as much on the product-related questions. The product-related questions are definitely coming through the majority of the IRs. So they're using IRs to get a lot of the product-related information. And it appears that they're asking for a lot more information so that they don't have to spend as much time on site and at the sites. And that might be related to COVID, or the pandemic, or it might be related to gene therapy. They're looking for more information. The agency in this situation, the agency was willing to combine a lot of inspections, so they reduced the amount of time that they were at the facilities. So they're doing fewer inspections. At least in our case, they did fewer inspections. And they were very multi-purpose inspections. So that's a little bit of new to this, new for me and new for this area. So we'll see if that continues moving forward, and as we move from post-pandemic, hopefully from post-pandemic. And then this is new. The FDA wants a lot more facility information than I'm used to. They're asking for raw material qualification, aseptic processing, simulation, all the information around that, equipment and cleaning validations, facility and utilities, environmental monitoring, etc. Another big thing that they asked for were deviations, deviation write-ups, and a lot of details there. That's not unusual for the agency to ask about deviations, but they even wanted deviations on the minor things. So they wanted us to do write-ups on the minor deviations, all the deviations. So they wanted everything. And I did think that was, to me, this is a new experience. they previously asked for, you expect them to ask about the deviations, the complex deviations, the product-related deviations, or deviations related to facilities or things like that, and give them the information and details. But they were asking about all the deviations. So that was just interesting, the learning that we had. All right. All right. So wrapping up. So wrapping up here, I just, in summary, I'll say that, the inspection, we're an ex vivo gene therapy company. We had 2 products and 2 sites that were inspected. The agencies that were involved were CBER, OTAT, and, DMPQ division. It was a PLI and a GMP inspection. As I said, inspection learnings, there was extensive use of IRs for facility information and step foot in the facility. It reminds me of, I don't know if I said this before, but it reminds me of back in the early days of when we had protein therapeutics and we had monoclonal antibodies. In the early days of protein therapeutics and monoclonal antibodies, the agency asked for everything. They asked for a lot of information. And this is reminding me, gene therapy is reminding me of the same thing, that they're sort of going back in time and they're asking for everything. So that's where it would be helpful to get some more guidance from the agency about what they're looking for. But it reminds me of that, where they're just asking for everything, SOPs, all this information, the facilities, etc. So the in-depth facility information, and particularly they're also asking, because of COVID right now, because of the pandemic, raw materials and supply constraints. The other things that we learned is it's been very challenging with during the pandemic, with the travel restrictions, the restrictions at the facilities themselves, and then having the need to, replace face-to-face meetings with virtual meetings. That was a challenge. It was a new way of working for a lot of us, and that presented a lot of challenges. It was just hard not being able to go to the facility as often as we would like to and engage with them. The other thing that occurred during this pandemic is absenteeism. It could have been absenteeism due to people being sick and being out sick, or absenteeism also because we had a lot of high turnover in the industry at the time. So the call out here is that going into all of this is identify who your team is, and then identify the backups and the backups of the backups, because you definitely don't know when you're going to need them, and you want to have that all planned out ahead of time. So really build out your team, and then know who the backups are and who the backups are, so that when you have either turnover or you have people who are sick or out, you can quickly pivot and adapt. So, and the problems that we're seeing, I believe that the FDA is seeing the same thing. So the challenges that we're seeing with turnover, the challenges we're seeing with COVID absenteeism, the agency is seeing as well. And that may be influencing some of the questions that they're asking us, because you may be getting new reviewers involved and et cetera. But anyway, it's just something to think about. And then really that's about it. So I want to thank you for your time, and I'll pause here and take any questions that you have, and thank you.